Welcome, dear dreamer. And tonight, we wander into the deep, breathing forests of the Slavic world. Those ancient woodlands where moss gathers like memory, where rivers murmur old songs, and where unseen beings linger just beyond the reach of daylight. Here, the trees stand not as silent witnesses, but as living gates to a world shaped by spirits, whispers, and the soft pulse of nature's oldest heart. In these shadowed realms dwell the forest guardians, the household protectors, the quiet watchers of river and marsh, beings who guided, guarded, and sometimes challenged those who walked too boldly through their domain. Their stories drifted through villages like wind through pine needles, teaching people to move gently through the world, to honor what breathes in silence, and to remember that nature has its own ancient eyes. Before we begin, tell me plainly, what are the small things you do at night that help you fall asleep faster? Share them with me. I would truly love to read everyone. And if these quiet journeys bring you peace, feel free to subscribe so we can keep wandering these old paths together. Long before cities rose from stone, long before roads carved their firm paths across the land, the people of the early Slavic world lived in a landscape shaped almost entirely by forest, river, and sky. Their villages clung to the edges of great woodlands, where the trees grew so tall and so old that their branches seemed to touch the drifting clouds. These forests were not mere clusters of trees. They were living realms, vast and breathing, filled with rustling voices and shifting shadows that moved in time with the seasons. In such a world, it felt natural, inevitable, to believe that every place carried its own spirit, its own silent guardian shaped by wind, earth, and memory. The earliest Slavic communities relied on the land for everything: food, shelter, warmth, and safety. They watched the forest constantly, its moods, its colors, its storms, its quiet dawns, until they learned to sense the subtle pulse that ran beneath bark and root. They saw how the trees bent under winter snow and straightened with spring winds, how rivers swelled and shrank with the turning year, how animals moved with intention through their hidden paths. These observations awakened a deeper understanding, that the world was not empty but full of presence, full of intention, full of unseen beings who shaped the balance between human life and the natural world. The people did not think of nature as separate from themselves. They saw the forest as an extension of their own breath, the rivers as the veins of the earth, the sky as a great canopy sheltering all beings beneath it. And because every part of the land felt alive, the early Slavs believed the world needed to be approached with respect, gentleness, and humility. To take from the forest, whether wood for a home or herbs for healing, one had to whisper gratitude or leave a quiet offering. To cross a river, one might speak a small blessing to its currents. To gather berries from a hidden grove, one might leave a braid of grasses tied to a branch. These gestures were small, but they carried the weight of a worldview built on relationship, not ownership. In these beliefs, the Slavic people saw the land as populated by spirits, some protective, some mischievous, some ancient beyond imagining. They believed that these beings were not distant deities seated high above the world, but neighbors who dwelled just past the edge of sight. The forest spirits lived among the roots and branches, guiding the animals and shaping the paths that humans dared to walk. Water spirits rested in rivers, lakes, and marshes, stirring currents with their moods. Spirits of field and home lingered near hearths, barns, and gardens, linking the domestic world to the wild. This interconnectedness meant that a person was never alone. The world was always watching, always responding. The boundaries between the natural and the supernatural were soft, porous, shifting like mist between trees. One did not need grand rituals or temples to speak with these spirits. Instead, communication happened through the everyday, pouring a little drink to the earth before sipping one's own, lighting a candle near a window during a storm, or leaving bread near a tree where one felt a strange stirring of presence. The early Slavs understood that to live well, One had to live attentively, with eyes open to the subtle signs the world sent. A sudden silence in a clearing, the bending of a single branch without wind, the echo of a soft laugh at dusk. These were not coincidences, but messages from the spirits. Seasonal change deepened this understanding. Winter slowed the land into quiet stillness, and the people believed the spirits retreated deeper into hidden realms. Spring awakened the world again, and with it came renewed activity among the unseen beings. Summer brought abundance, warmth, and the playful movement of spirits across fields and streams. Autumn carried a more solemn tone, a reminder that the cycle would soon fold back into darkness. Living so closely with the shifting seasons shaped the belief that time itself was alive, turning, breathing, and guiding both human and spirit realms with steady rhythm. To the early Slavs, the forest was the oldest and most powerful presence of all. It stretched endlessly across their lands, from northern pines to southern oaks, forming a green sea that defined their world. Within that vastness, the people felt both small and protected. They trusted the forest to provide and to warn, to welcome and to challenge. But this trust was never taken lightly. The forest held secrets, and its spirits could be unpredictable. A traveler who walked respectfully might find a safe path home. One who walked carelessly might wander in circles for hours, guided by unseen hands. Stories passed from village to village told of hunters who vanished without trace, or emerged days later with strange dreams and new wisdom in their eyes. These stories were not meant to frighten, but to teach. They reminded people that nature was powerful, and that its spirits were not to be commanded, but understood. To walk into the forest without humility risked losing more than direction. It risked losing harmony with the world itself. But to walk with reverence meant gaining something precious, a sense of belonging to a place filled with wonder, mystery, and ancient guidance. Rivers carried their own spirits, gentle but watchful. The people believed that water remembered. Every step taken through it, every offering given, every wrong committed near its banks. Lakes, deep and still, held their own personalities, more patient, more reflective. Marshlands, difficult and shadowed, were said to harbor spirits who preferred solitude and silence. These waters shaped daily life: where to fish, where to gather reeds for weaving, where to cross safely. The people knew that the spirits of the waters did not seek worship, but respect. Cool, calm offerings placed at dawn, or songs sung softly while kneeling by the shore. Even the wind carried meaning. A sudden warm gust in winter was a sign of a wandering spirit passing through. A sharp wind in summer might signal the displeasure of a forest guardian. A gentle breeze at dusk could be a greeting from a distant, ancestral presence. Every shift in the air felt like a message from the unseen, and the people learned to read these signs as carefully as they read footprints in the snow or ripples on a pond. Everything in this world was interconnected: forest, river, sky, animal, human, and spirit. The early Slavs did not divide the world into natural and supernatural. They saw it as a single tapestry woven with many threads. Some threads were visible, others hidden, but all were part of the same pattern. When a child was born, the family whispered to the spirits of the home, asking for protection. When someone passed away, offerings were given to the land to ensure peaceful passage. When storms threatened the village, people sang soft chants hoping to calm the winds. These actions were expressions of relationship, not fear. As generations passed, these beliefs deepened into tradition. Festivals marked the turning seasons, each celebration rooted in the acknowledgement of unseen presences. People decorated trees with ribbons, placed candles near springs, left bread in the forest at midsummer, or scattered grain onto frozen ground in winter. These customs did not arise from obligation, but from gratitude, for shelter, for food, for guidance, for the breath of the world itself. Thus the Slavic worldview emerged, one shaped by forests that whispered in twilight, rivers that shimmered with quiet spirit light, and skies that shifted in patterns too old to name. A worldview where every step was taken with awareness, every moment felt connected to something deeper. The people walked gently because the land was alive. They spoke softly because the spirits listened. They lived with reverence because the world around them held endless presence. For in the Slavic imagination, nature was not backdrop, it was kin. A living realm of breath and memory, a home of spirits who watched from behind leaf and shadow, and a teacher whose lessons flowed in the quiet turning of the seasons. As the early Slavic world deepened its bond with the land, the people slowly realized that the earth did not merely support life, it shaped thought, emotion, rhythm, and belief. Villages nestled near rivers or settled among wide plains carried different tones, but all shared the same quiet certainty that the world breathed with unseen presence. The forest watched, the water listened, the sky remembered. And humans, small in the vastness of these realms, learned to move gently within them, recognizing themselves as part of an older, greater balance. Life in these early communities unfolded in cycles, closely tied to nature's shifting moods. Dawn arrived not just as light, but as a signal that the protective spirits of night were withdrawing and the spirits of day were awakening. The soft glow on the horizon carried with it the breath of new beginnings, fresh water drawn from springs, first offerings left upon stones, and the quiet steps of villagers preparing for their daily tasks. Evening, too, carried meaning. When the sun slipped behind the treetops, the shadowed world stirred into a different kind of awareness. Fires were lit, but never without a whispered greeting to the ancestors or to the earth that provided the wood. In this world where every moment touched the supernatural, the people developed a deep sensitivity to signs, subtle movements that others might overlook. A bird landing on a particular branch, the sudden stillness of wind, the unexpected call of an animal at dusk. These were threads of communication woven between human life and the invisible spirits watching from behind bark, root, and riverstone. Even dreams held weight. A vision of a forest path, a glimmering lake, or a flicker of firelight could be interpreted as guidance from ancestral spirits or nature guardians who moved freely between worlds. Such sensitivity was not seen as superstition, but as wisdom. It taught the early Slavs to live with awareness, humility, and gratitude. They believed that nature spoke gently but truthfully, and that to ignore its messages was to risk imbalance. When a hunter paused at the forest's edge and felt an unexpected chill, he turned back. When a woman gathering herbs sensed a hush deeper than usual, she whispered a prayer before stepping forward. When a child followed a butterfly into the trees and suddenly felt lost, she was taught to close her eyes, breathe softly, and ask the forest to guide her home. These practices were not rituals, they were ways of being. Seasonal rhythms strengthened this bond even further. Every season carried its own spirits, its own voice. Spring was a season of awakening, filled with youthful energies believed to dance through thawing streams and stirring soil. The people greeted spring with modest offerings. Milk poured onto the earth, bread left beside blooming branches, a small woven charm hung on a tree. Summer carried the warmth of growth, the hum of bees, and the protective presence of spirits who guarded fields and livestock. Autumn brought a quieter presence. Rustling leaves were said to be the soft footsteps of ancestors passing through the land, watching over the harvest. Winter, though cold and harsh, was revered as a season of reflection, a time when the world narrowed into stillness and the deep spirits of the land withdrew into their ancient sanctuaries. To live within these seasons was to feel life moving in slow circles. The early Slavs believed that the spirits followed these circles too, growing stronger in some months, quieter in others, always shifting with the world around them. Just as humans rested during the darkest months, so did the spirits of fields, forests, and waters. Just as humans celebrated abundance at harvest, the spirits, too, stirred with brighter presence. This shared cycle built trust between the visible and invisible realms, a trust that shaped every act of daily life. In this worldview, even the smallest elements of nature carried significance. Stones were not idle objects. They were anchors of memory, believed to store energy from the footsteps of countless beings that had crossed the land. Standing stones, whether placed by human hands or shaped by time alone, were seen as lodges of powerful spirits. Trees were more than shelter. They were guardians who had watched centuries pass, who held wisdom in their rings, and whose roots connected the world above with the deep, unseen realms below. Water was not merely water. It was a living threshold between worlds, a mirror reflecting not just the sky but the souls of those who approached it. Because of this, the people treated nature as a partner rather than a resource. When they cut wood, they chose trees carefully, never those that seemed to hum with strange presence or stood near groves known to house spirits. When they fished, they thanked the river, dipping their hands into the water in a quiet gesture of offering. When they built homes, they consulted elders who had learned how to read the land, how to sense the places where the earth smiled upon human dwelling, and the places where invisible eyes watched with stern disapproval. Harmony with nature was not optional, it was essential. This respect extended into relationships between humans as well. Every family believed that disharmony in the home could disturb the spirits of the land around them. Arguments left unresolved, cruelty toward animals, carelessness with fire. These were not merely human failings but disruptions that could ripple into the unseen realm. To restore balance, people performed small acts of healing, washing hands in cold water, lighting candles with intention, singing soft songs to calm both the household and the spirits who guarded it. In their stories, the early Slavs imagined nature spirits not as distant entities, but as neighbors sharing the same land. These stories were not just tales told for entertainment. They were carriers of wisdom, teaching people how to move gently in a living world. The Leshy, the guardian of forests, taught humility and respect. River spirits taught caution and gratitude. Field spirits warned of greed. Ancestral spirits reminded villagers of lineage, responsibility, and the flow of time from generation to generation. Children grew up hearing these stories, absorbing them as naturally as they absorbed the changing of the seasons. They learned early that the world was filled with companions, some seen, some unseen. They learned that silence was a language, that patience could bring clarity, and that the land always responded to how it was treated. To them, the idea of living without these spirits would have felt as strange as living without stars or wind. In time, these beliefs wove themselves into the culture so deeply that they shaped identity itself. Festivals emerged from the changing seasons. Rituals of planting and harvest carried echoes of gratitude to the spirits. Song, dance, and craft absorbed symbols of forests, rivers, and animals believed to hold protective power. The people did not fear the spirits, they honored them. They did not seek dominion over the land, they sought partnership. As generations passed, the Slavic worldview became a tapestry woven with reverence, humility, and wonder. It grounded life in a sense of continuity, where each action touched the natural world and each moment flowed into a deeper, unseen realm. The people understood that they walked through a living world filled with memory and meaning, and that to walk without awareness was to lose connection to the very breath of the land. For in the Slavic imagination, the world was never empty. It was a vast and living home, where every tree held a whisper, every river carried a voice, and every shadow hid a spirit watching over the quiet turning of life. Long before people gave names to the shadows beneath the branches, long before paths were carved through the thickets or villages rose along forest edges, the Slavic world knew of a presence that moved between the trees with the patience of centuries. This presence was older than woven baskets and hearth fires, older than songs passed from mother to child. older even than the first stories that tried to capture its shape. It was the Leshy, guardian of the deep woods, keeper of its mysteries, protector of every creature that called the forest its home. To speak of him was to speak of the forest itself, vast, unpredictable, wise, and endlessly alive. The Leshy was not a god in the high, distant sense, nor a simple spirit drifting aimlessly through leaves and moss. He was something in between, rooted in the earth yet awake with intelligence, a being shaped by bark and breath, branch and shadow. He walked the same ground as hunters and wanderers, but never in a form they fully understood. Some said he appeared as a tall man, towering above the tallest pine with hair made of tangled vines. Others claimed he shrank to the size of a child and laughed from behind mushrooms. A few whispered that he could turn into a wolf or a crow or a shifting ripple of wind passing through the leaves. His form was the forest's form, changing, ancient, impossible to hold. People learned early that the Leshy's presence was not to be ignored. When one walked into the deep woods without offering respect, paths became strange. A familiar tree might appear in the wrong place. A stream might twist in a direction it had never flowed before. A person might wander in circles, hearing soft footsteps behind them though no one followed. Yet those who entered with humility found the forest kinder. A fallen branch would point toward a safe trail. The wind would quiet when danger approached. And sometimes, a traveler would feel a gentle nudge, like a hand made of air, guiding them away from a ravine or leading them to a safe clearing before nightfall. The Leshy was, above all, a keeper of balance. He guarded the animals of the forest, deer who moved like soft shadows, wolves whose howls shaped the night, bears who lumbered through berry thickets, and tiny birds that stitched their songs through the branches. If a hunter took more than he needed, or killed without gratitude, the Leshy watched. Tracks would vanish, bows would misfire, the forest itself would turn against the careless. But a hunter who whispered a blessing before drawing his bow, who thanked the spirit of the animal after each hunt, who left offerings of bread or salt beneath a sturdy tree, such a hunter found himself under the Leshy's quiet protection. Children grew up hearing stories of the Leshy's lessons. They were told to stay close to their parents in the woods, for the Leshy loved to test the bold-hearted. If a child strayed too far, the forest might rearrange itself, turning one familiar tree into 3 and 3 into 30 more, until the paths looked foreign and strange. Yet these tricks were rarely cruel. The Leshy was a guardian, not a monster. He confused wanderers to teach them humility, to remind them that the forest was not theirs to command. Once the lesson was learned, once fear gave way to respect, the trees often shifted back into place, and a safe way home opened through the brush. Even the weather seemed to move in harmony with him. On days when the Leshy was pleased, sunlight filtered gently through the canopy, forming pools of gold on the forest floor. Birds twittered softly. Leaves rustled in calm rhythms. But when he was angered, when a tree had been cut without prayer, when a sacred grove had been disturbed, the sky darkened quickly. Winds whipped through branches, animals fell silent, and travelers felt an unease that settled deep beneath their ribs. Storms in the forest were not simply storms, they were warnings shaped by the Leshy's breath. Some stories told of those rare moments when the Leshy revealed himself with clarity. A shepherd might wander too deep into the woods while searching for a lost goat. A logger might raise his axe and feel a sudden chill before the first swing. A traveler might begin to sing to calm his nerves and hear a second voice humming along behind him. In those moments, a figure would step between the trees, tall as a pine, with eyes that shimmered green like moss in morning light. His skin appeared carved from bark, lined with rings like the trunk of a mighty oak. His beard flowed like a river of leaves, and when he spoke, the words seemed woven from wind and earth. Yet even then, he remained partly hidden, one moment solid, the next fading into the shadows he called home. It was said that the Leshy walked backward when leaving human sight, so that no one could follow him into his deeper realm. Others claimed he shifted into the shape of a young boy or a wandering shepherd before guiding lost travelers to safety. Still others whispered that he sometimes took the form of a great stag, its antlers like branches, its eyes glowing with the soft intelligence of the woods. No one agreed on what he truly looked like, which was, perhaps, exactly how the Leshy preferred it. To the early Slavs, the Leshy embodied the forest's complexity. He could be kind, offering guidance when needed. He could be stern, withholding paths until respect was shown. He could be playful, leading travelers in harmless circles. He could be unpredictable, testing those who entered too confidently. But above all, he was protective, watching over every root and stone, every creature who lived beneath the canopy, every secret hidden in the soft, dark soil. Offerings kept the peace between humans and the woodland guardian. Travelers left pieces of bread near old stumps. Hunters buried small coins beneath birch trees. Families poured milk into hollows at the forest's edge, hoping the Leshy would guard their livestock from wolves or lead stray animals home. Children left woven flowers on fallen logs, whispering small wishes into the air. These gestures did not guarantee safety, but they acknowledged the Leshy's presence, honoring the ancient relationship between people and the wild. The Leshy also shaped the rhythm of village life at its borders. Before entering the deep woods, people spoke softly. They walked carefully. They avoided boasting aloud, for pride was a scent that drew the Leshy's attention quickly. Instead, they approached the forest humbly, as though stepping into the home of someone who listened closely from the shadows. And as long as that respect was offered, the Leshy watched with steady, silent approval, allowing the people to gather berries, herbs, and firewood without harm. During winter, when the forest stood bare and the world seemed stripped of color, the Leshy's presence felt quieter but no less powerful. Footprints in the snow sometimes ended abruptly, fading into nothing. Trees creaked with strange melodies in the cold wind, and beneath the frozen branches, the earth slept, guarded by a spirit whose patience stretched far beyond the seasons. When spring returned, and the first green shoots broke through the thawing ground, the people believed the Leshy stirred as well, awakening to guide the forest back into vibrant life. For in the Slavic imagination, the Leshy was not a myth, but a neighbor, a living breath in the quiet woods, a reminder that the wild was never empty. He was the shifting of shadows, the rustle of unseen movement, the ancient pulse beneath root and leaf. A guardian, a teacher, a watcher in the green dusk. The Leshy walked where the forest dreamed, and those who honored him walked safely in return. Morning in the deep woods did not break suddenly, but rose like a slow exhale, seeping through leaves in muted shades of silver and green. The forest woke without haste, stretching shadows across mossy ground as birds stirred cautiously among the branches. It was during these quiet hours, when mist clung low and the world felt half-dreaming, that the Leshy's presence was most strongly felt. Not in dramatic displays or fearful signs, but in the subtle rearrangements of the world. A fallen branch moved from where it had been the day before, a trail of mushrooms marking a line that had not existed at dusk. A soft hollow in the moss shaped as though something had been sitting there through the night. The people who lived near these forests believed that the Leshy walked the woods in the early hours, checking on the creatures under his care. They said he visited wolf dens to ensure pups were safe from storms, brushed dew from sleeping stags' antlers, and whispered encouragement to new sprouts pushing through the soil. To imagine him moving through the dim morning light was to imagine the forest itself shifting from quiet to wakefulness. Every rustle of leaves, every soft thump of a distant creature, every gentle ripple of wind felt like a sign of his passage. One tale spoke of a young shepherd who once followed hoofprints deep into the woods, searching for a lost goat. As he walked, the forest grew strangely quiet. Birds paused mid-call, the wind seemed to step aside, and the trees leaned inward as though listening. The shepherd knew better than to panic. Instead, he knelt, placed his hand on the earth, and whispered a simple greeting, a gesture taught by his mother since childhood. A moment later, a breeze brushed against his cheek, guiding him forward. He followed its gentle push until he found the goat resting safely beside a fallen birch, as though placed there deliberately. When he turned to thank the unseen guardian, he glimpsed the outline of a towering figure between the trees, broad-shouldered, branch-haired, half-shadowed, watching silently before dissolving into morning light. Encounters like these shaped the people's understanding of the Leshy. He did not reveal himself fully, nor did he seek devotion. What he desired was harmony, an acknowledgement that the forest was alive and deserving of respect. Those who entered the woods with reverence found their steps cushioned, their fears softened. Those who entered carelessly found the trees bending in ways that confused the senses, the paths turning oddly, and the air feeling thick with unseen eyes. Parents taught children to listen for the signs of the Leshy's mood. When the forest felt warm and bright, the Leshy was pleased. When shadows deepened in midday, or when animals grew unexpectedly silent, he was warning of something. Perhaps a storm, perhaps the presence of a predator, or perhaps that someone had trespassed without proper humility. Children learned early that offering a few crumbs of bread at the forest's edge, or tying a small ribbon to a low branch, could restore balance. The Leshy did not need grand offerings. He responded to sincerity. Hunters understood this more deeply than most. A respectful hunter did not track prey mindlessly. He walked slowly, observing the forest's mood. If the Leshy favored him, the path seemed to open, branches gently parting, tracks remaining clear, animals moving with a rhythm that felt almost like invitation. If the Leshy disapproved, everything changed. The hunter's bowstring might feel strangely loose, arrows might fall from his quiver, or the forest might echo with misleading sounds. Many hunters returned home empty-handed not because they lacked skill, but because they had failed to acknowledge the guardian who watched every movement of the wild. And yet, the Leshy's relationship with humans was not one of rigid judgment. He was known to have a mischievous streak, a playful side that appeared most often when travelers seemed too confident. A wanderer might hear footsteps behind him, only to turn and find nothing. A familiar clearing might suddenly seem to tilt, making directions uncertain. A small stone might roll across the trail as if nudged by invisible fingers. These tricks were harmless unless met with anger or arrogance. Those who laughed softly, acknowledged the forest's trickster spirit, and walked on without fear often found themselves safely home before long. Those who cursed or panicked found the woods twisting further around them, until humility softened their hearts. Stories told by elders described the Leshy as a being who mirrored the forest's own duality. Like the trees that offered shade yet hid predators, like rivers that nourished yet swept the unwary away, the Leshy embodied both kindness and danger. He guided the respectful but tested the bold. He nurtured life but punished recklessness. He was a reminder that the wild was not an enemy to be conquered, but a realm to be understood, befriended, and honored. During midsummer, when the forest grew thick with green and the days stretched long into warm twilight, people believed the Leshy's power reached its height. On those nights, the woods hummed with energy. Fireflies drifted in rolling waves of gold, and the scent of flowering herbs filled the air. Children were warned not to wander too far, for the Leshy was especially curious during these warm nights. He was said to invite travelers into dances of shifting lights, or lead them toward hidden glades where time felt strangely paused. Some glades were safe havens where one could rest under ancient oaks without fear. Others were older, deeper places, where the presence of the Leshy pressed so strongly against the air that even the bravest hunters walked softly, sensing that they were guests within a domain far older than human memory. In autumn, when the leaves blazed in brilliant colors, the Leshy seemed to soften. The forest grew quieter, preparing for winter's rest. The Leshy guided animals toward their dens, watched over the falling leaves, and tended to the roots that burrowed deep for warmth. He became a guardian of stillness, helping the forest prepare for the long sleep. Travelers during this season felt his presence less as a trickster and more as a silent watcher, a shadow at the edge of vision, ensuring the woods entered winter without disturbance. Winter itself brought a different kind of stillness. Snow muffled every sound, and the trees stood bare and quiet. The Leshy retreated deeper into the ancient heart of the forest, walking paths known only to him. Yet even in this season, his presence lingered. A sudden shift of snow from a high branch might be his doing. A faint trail appearing beside a lonely traveler might be his guidance. In the darkest nights, when the moon cast silver light across frozen ground, people believed the Leshy walked silently across the snow, checking on each hollow, each burrow, each place where life slept beneath the cold. Spring awakened him again. As the first green buds appeared, the Leshy stirred with renewed energy. He walked the forest floor, coaxing new growth from damp earth, watching young fawns take their first trembling steps. The people welcomed this season with offerings. Eggs dyed with natural colors, bread shaped in circles, milk poured onto roots, inviting the Leshy's blessing for crops, animals, and children alike. Though the Leshy rarely interacted directly with humans, he shaped every part of their lives. Farmers trusted him to guard the edges of their fields. Shepherds whispered thanks to him when lost animals returned unharmed. Woodsmen left small tokens near tree stumps, asking forgiveness before cutting trees essential for winter warmth. Families told stories of him during long nights, ensuring each generation grew up with a sense of humility toward the world beyond their doors. For in the Slavic imagination, the Leshy was not an enemy nor a myth, but the pulse of the forest made manifest, a reminder that the wild breathed, watched, and remembered. He was the quiet rustle in the fern, the tall shadow between the trunks, the ancient guide whose presence shaped every path beneath the branches. A guardian whose lessons echoed through generations, teaching all who wandered his woods to walk gently, to listen deeply, and to honor the wild that lived beyond the edge of understanding. Long before grand cities rose or stone walls divided land from land, the early Slavic people believed that every home was a living world of its own, a small circle of warmth carved from the vastness of forest and field. In this intimate space of firelight, wooden beams, woven mats, and quiet breath, they felt a presence that was neither human nor entirely spirit. It lived softly within the walls, moved gently through the shadows, and watched over the hearth like a guardian older than the home itself. This presence was the Domovoi, the household spirit, whose quiet protection shaped daily life in ways both tender and profound. The Domovoi was not a distant deity. He was a companion, a watchful elder, a keeper of order within the boundaries of home. He rarely showed himself directly, but those who lived attentively could sense him in the shifting of embers at night, in the faint pressure on a wooden floor where no one stood, or in the soft rattle of pots when the wind outside was still. He was the heartbeat of the household, steady, unseen, yet unmistakably present. Families believed he settled beneath the hearth or behind the stove, places where warmth was strongest and where the fire's glow cast long, comforting shadows. He was described in many ways as varied as the homes he protected. Some imagined him as a small, elderly figure with wild hair like tangled straw and eyes bright with mischief and wisdom. Others saw him as a shadow shaped like a man, no taller than a child, who slipped silently through the corners of a room. A few believed he appeared as a tiny flicker of flame, rising from the hearth's coals when danger approached. But no matter the form, all agreed that the Domovoi carried an ancient intelligence, not the cold distance of a god, but the warm familiarity of a guardian who knew every creak of the floor and every breath of those who lived within his care. He was deeply connected to the land from which the home was built. If the wood used in the walls came from a tree with kind energy, the Domovoi would be gentle. If the home had been set upon soil favored by ancestral spirits, his presence felt strong and protective. Families often invited him formally into the home when it was first built, offering bread, milk, or a small tuft of wool placed near the hearth. These simple gestures were acts of welcome, acknowledging that a house was not merely a shelter of beams and thatch, but a living space requiring harmony between human and spirit. In daily life, the Domovoi's presence influenced nearly everything. He guarded livestock, ensuring cows calved safely and chickens remained healthy. He watched over children, keeping them from wandering too close to dangerous tools or open flames. He stirred restlessness in a family member who forgot to latch a door at night, nudging them towards safety. When travelers approached the home, he sensed whether they carried good intentions. If they did, the hearth crackled brightly in greeting. If not, the air felt thick and hushed, warning the family to be cautious. But the Domovoi's protection was not unconditional. He disliked disorder, quarrels, and neglect. A messy house, an unclean hearth, or constant arguments could disturb him, causing him to signal his displeasure through gentle but unmistakable signs. A pot might fall from a shelf without reason. Floors might creak more loudly than usual. Embers might hiss sharply in the fire. These were not punishments, they were reminders, urging the family to restore harmony. For the Domovoi believed that a home reflected both the land's spirit and the hearts of its occupants. Where peace reigned, he thrived. Where discord grew, he struggled. Children in Slavic households learned early to respect the Domovoi. They whispered goodnight to the shadows near the stove, left small crumbs of bread on the table before sleeping, and avoided stamping loudly through the house after dark. They knew that the Domovoi, though small and unseen, listened attentively. Some children, especially those with soft hearts and curious minds, claimed to feel him brush past like a warm breeze or hear faint footsteps near the hearth late at night. Parents did not dismiss these stories. Instead, they smiled gently, knowing that the Domovoi often revealed himself more easily to youthful eyes unburdened by doubt. Families believed that each household had its own Domovoi, bound not only to the home, but to the people who lived there. When a family moved, they performed small rituals to invite the Domovoi to come with them. A piece of the old hearthstone or a handful of soil from beneath the home was carefully collected and carried to the new dwelling. Bread was placed on the threshold, and the Domovoi was called softly by name, if one was known. Only after these gestures did the family cross into their new home, trusting that their unseen guardian followed. The Domovoi's relationship with the hearth made winter an especially meaningful season. As snow fell outside and winds howled against the shutters, the hearth became the center of life. The Domovoi grew most active during these long nights, tending to the home's warmth as though it were his own lifeblood. He guarded against embers that might spark too far, ensured the fire did not die unexpectedly, and watched over children sleeping close to the stove. When storms raged through the forest, villagers believed the Domovoi stood like a silent sentinel, holding the home together with his ancient presence. In summertime, when doors were left open and sunlight spilled into rooms, the Domovoi moved more quietly. He wandered between the walls, inspected the barns, and followed children playing in the yard, ensuring they did not stray into hazardous places. Some believed he rode unseen on the backs of cats, who seemed to sense danger before humans did. Cats were favored companions of the Domovoi. Their graceful movements and mysterious eyes were said to reflect the spirit world's subtle awareness. Where a cat watched, the Domovoi watched too. Although the Domovoi acted mostly as a protector, he could be stern when necessary. A farmer who mistreated his animals might find tools misplaced or chores unexpectedly difficult. A family member who spoke with unnecessary harshness might feel a sudden chill, as though the shadows themselves disapproved. These were lessons, not threats. The Domovoi sought harmony, and disharmony was something he could not abide. If a family heeded his warnings and mended their ways, the warmth of the home returned quickly. If not, the Domovoi sometimes withdrew entirely, leaving the household feeling cold and strangely empty, even in the presence of fire. Stories passed through generations described moments when the Domovoi appeared clearly to a family member. An elderly grandmother might wake one winter night to see a small, bearded figure tending the hearth. A weary farmer might glimpse a shadowy guardian crouched protectively near the barn door as wolves prowled in the dark beyond. A young mother might feel a gentle tug on her sleeve as she dozed, warning her that her infant was stirring. These encounters were rare, but those who experienced them carried their memory with reverence, never doubting that they had been visited by the spirit of their home. The Domovoi also reflected the personality of the household. If a family was kind and generous, the Domovoi behaved gently, keeping peace within the walls. If the family was proud, careless, or quarrelsome, the Domovoi mirrored that energy, becoming restless or mischievous. He was not separate from the household. He was its reflection, its memory, its guardian shaped by the very people he protected. And because of this, families took care not only of their home structure, but of their home spirit. Clean floors, warm hospitality, quiet voices in the evening. These were offerings just as meaningful as bread or milk. As years passed and children grew into adults who built homes of their own, the Domovoi remained a presence that connected generations. Grandparents told stories of the guardian who had watched them sleep as children. Parents whispered guidance to help little ones understand the quiet creaks in the night. Even those who moved far from their childhood homes carried the sense of the Domovoi with them, feeling comfort in the idea that a familiar spirit still tended the hearth where their earliest memories lived. For the Domovoi was more than a household spirit. He was the warmth of belonging, the quiet order that held a family together, the gentle presence who watched from shadow and firelight alike. He was the soul of the home, woven into every beam and every breath, reminding all who lived there that even in the smallest spaces, the unseen world kept careful, loving watch. As night deepened and lamps dimmed to embers, the presence of the Domovoi felt strongest, moving softly through corners where shadows pooled like warm ink. Though the household slept, he remained ever watchful. The Domovoi did not rest as humans did. His awareness drifted through the rooms with the quiet certainty of someone who belonged entirely to the space he protected. Sometimes he perched unseen near the rafters, listening to the slow breathing of the family. Other times he settled by the hearth, his presence reflected only in the brief rise and fall of a coal that crackled at the wrong moment. In these hours, the Domovoi was both guardian and memory, ensuring that the home remained safe until dawn. People believed that the Domovoi could sense the future not through prophecy, but through an intimate knowledge of the home and its rhythms. If illness approached, he would stir uneasily, causing objects to shift or creak in warning. If prosperity neared, the hearth burned brighter, as though fed by an unseen hand. When a family member left for a long journey, the Domovoi lingered near the threshold, brushing a soft warmth against their back, an unspoken blessing. And when someone returned, dusty from travel and heavy with stories, the air inside the home felt subtly lighter, as though the spirit welcomed them back with relief. During difficult times, the Domovoi took on an even more active role. If storms rattled the shutters and winds clawed at the roof, families felt a steadying calm, as though invisible hands held the home firm. If wolves prowled near the barn, uneasy animals settled when the Domovoi stood guard. There were stories of farmers waking at night to the smell of smoke, only to discover that a fallen ember had nearly ignited the barn. But somehow, a bucket of water had been overturned nearby, dampening the danger before it spread. These moments were never credited to luck. They were seen as quiet acts of protection from the watchful spirit who lived in the walls, but his guardianship extended beyond safety. The Domovoi cared for the harmony of the home, something the early Slavs valued as much as warmth or food. When family members treated one another with kindness, the home felt bright, and the Domovoi's energy became gentle, almost playful. He might tap softly at the window as a reminder that he was pleased. A stray cat might appear at the doorstep, drawn by the welcoming atmosphere. Bread baked more evenly, fires warmed more steadily, and rest came easily to all who slept under the roof. When quarrels rose or tempers flared, however, the Domovoi responded quickly. He was not a spirit of confrontation, but he understood the dangers of disharmony. A sudden draft might blow through the room, extinguishing a candle in the middle of a heated argument. A wooden spoon might slip from someone's hand at the moment they spoke too harshly. Floorboards might groan loudly when someone tried to slam a door. These subtle interjections were the Domovoi's way of urging peace, reminding the household that conflict disturbed not only human hearts, but the spirit who shared their home. It was said that the Domovoi understood emotions more deeply than words. He sensed sorrow before tears fell and loneliness before anyone spoke it aloud. In such times, he softened the room's atmosphere, making the hearth warmer or the air unusually gentle, as though the house itself embraced its occupants. A lonely child might wake to find a toy unexpectedly propped beside their bed. An elderly grandmother grieving a loss might feel a soft brush against her sleeve as she sat by the fire. These gestures, light as whispers, brief as dreams, reminded the family that even in their quietest pain, the home remained a place of refuge. Sometimes, the Domovoi nudged families toward decisions that preserved their well-being. A father thinking about traveling to trade in the next village might feel an inexplicable heaviness that made him stay home, only to hear later that a storm had swept the region he intended to visit. A young couple wondering whether to build an addition to their home might find the soil inexplicably soft and inviting on one side of the yard, as though the earth and the Domovoi approved. These signs were rarely dramatic. They unfolded through gentle intuition and small moments that, when reflected upon later, felt guided. One of the most cherished customs tied to the Domovoi was the practice of midnight bread, a ritual performed when a family felt uncertain about the future. A small loaf was prepared late at night and placed near the hearth. If the bread cracked softly as it baked, the Domovoi was believed to approve, signaling good fortune ahead. If the bread remained dense and quiet, the family interpreted it as a sign to move cautiously in the coming days. These rituals grounded people in the belief that the home was not inert. It listened, responded, and participated in their lives. The Domovoi's influence also extended to animals, especially those kept close to the home. Horses were said to sense him most keenly, sometimes nickering softly or turning their heads as though acknowledging a presence behind them. Cats often stared into corners where nothing visible stood, their tails swaying slowly as their eyes followed movements humans could not see. Dogs, too, were sensitive. They might wag their tails in empty rooms, responding to something gentle in the air. When animals behaved oddly, the family paid attention, understanding that the Domovoi often communicated through the beings who shared the household. Changes in the home itself could stir the Domovoi. Renovations were approached with caution, since altering the structure of a dwelling might unsettle its guardian. Before moving furniture or rebuilding walls, families tapped gently on the wooden beams, offering a few soft words of explanation. They left small offerings, cornmeal, salt, milk, beneath the stove to reassure the Domovoi that the changes were made not out of disrespect but necessity. Neglecting these gestures could cause minor disturbances. Misplaced items, restless nights, or sudden cold spots in the room. These were reminders to acknowledge the spirit who had lived there long before any change was made. As years turned to generations, the Domovoi grew bound not only to the home, but to the family lineage. He remembered the laughter of children who had long grown old. He carried the echoes of lullabies sung by mothers whose voices had faded into the past. He knew the names of ancestors whose portraits hung on walls, and he guarded their memory with the same devotion he gave to the living. When families recited stories around the fire, the Domovoi listened, holding these memories like small treasures. In this way, he became not just a protector of the home, but a keeper of history. Even when Christianity spread through Slavic lands, new icons were placed on shelves, the Domovoi remained. His presence adapted rather than vanished. Some families imagined him kneeling beside icons in quiet respect. Others believed he moved more softly so as not to disturb the new order. But almost no one dismissed him entirely. He had lived in the walls far too long, woven too deeply into the memories of generations. Though his name was sometimes whispered instead of spoken openly, the Domovoi endured as the quiet soul of the household. When a member of the family died, the Domovoi moved with quiet reverence. He was said to sit unseen near the body during the vigil, guarding the soul as it journeyed into the ancestral realm. After mourning passed and life resumed, the Domovoi shifted toward comforting the living, nudging warmth into cold rooms, softening the air around places where sorrow lingered. He understood grief, for he carried centuries of it within him, and yet he also understood endurance. Sometimes, when the last descendant of a family left a home permanently, the Domovoi waited. He lingered by the hearth, listening to the silent walls, hoping for footsteps that never returned. These were the only stories in which the Domovoi felt truly lonely. Yet even then, he rarely abandoned the house. He simply quieted, becoming part of the stillness until a new family arrived. Then, if welcomed, he awakened again, shaking centuries of dust from his spirit, stepping forward to watch over a new lineage with the same gentle devotion as before. For the Domovoi was, in essence, the pulse of home itself, a guardian shaped not by grandeur but by care, a memory woven through generations, a presence made of warmth, shadow, and quiet devotion. He lived in the creak of old floorboards, in the settling sigh of beams after sunset, in the soft glow of the hearth that gathered a family close. And as long as a home was treated with respect and love, the Domovoi would remain, ever watchful, ever present, a humble spirit carrying centuries of care within the quiet heart of the household. Long before the first village wells were dug, long before bridges spanned rivers or ferries shaped the rhythm of trade, the Slavic people understood water as a realm of its own, alive, watchful, and deeply unpredictable. They lived beside lakes that mirrored the moon with uncanny clarity, beside marshes where reeds whispered secrets in the wind, and beside rivers whose currents seemed to think and feel. In this world shaped by flowing, shifting waters, they sensed beings who dwelled beneath the surface, spirits whose presence shimmered like a second reflection of the world. Among these beings, none were more mysterious, more hauntingly beautiful, or more woven into the rhythm of life than the Rusalka. To the early Slavs, a Rusalka was not simply a water spirit. She was the breath of the river, the voice of the lake, the memory of the marsh, an embodiment of water's dual nature, capable of nurturing life or taking it away. Stories spoke of her as a woman with hair like riverweed, drifting long and green as reeds in spring. Others described her as pale as moonlight, her eyes reflecting the quiet of deep water. Some said she appeared with skin that glowed faintly under ripples, as though carrying the light of lost stars. But always, she was tied to water, moving with the currents, listening to the wind that skimmed across its surface, and awakening when humans drew too close. To understand the Rusalka was to understand the ancient Slavic relationship with water. Rivers fed crops, carried fish, washed wounds, and shaped settlements. Lakes were sources of life, but also places of danger, where spirits stirred in stillness. Marshlands, though feared for their shifting ground, were recognized as sacred in their own way, deeply tied to ancestral memory. The people approached these places with reverence, offering milk, herbs, and whispered blessings at their edges. They understood that water gave generously, but only when honored. And the Rusalka watched all of this with silent intelligence. Stories of the Rusalka varied, but in many of them, she lingered near the water's edge at dusk, when the world softened and the line between seen and unseen thinned. Villagers collecting reeds or washing clothes claimed to feel a presence behind them, a cool brush of air, a faint ripple where none should be, the sound of soft laughter drifting across still water. Sometimes they saw a figure sitting on a stone with her feet in the river, combing her long hair with a fishbone comb. Sometimes she appeared as a flash of white beneath the surface, vanishing as quickly as she came. Encounters were rare but carried deep meaning, reminding the people that water was a realm shared, not owned. In some tales, the Rusalka was gentle. She guided lost children away from deep pools, nudged fishermen toward good catches, and soothed the water during storms. In others, she was stern, a guardian who exacted respect for her domain. A person who polluted the water or mocked its spirits might find their nets mysteriously tangled, their boats drifting off course, or the river rising without warning. But these were not acts of cruelty, they were reminders. The Rusalka sought balance, teaching humans that the river was not merely a resource, but a living presence deserving of care. Certain nights of the year held special significance, particularly during spring, when the world awakened after winter's hush. During these weeks, the Rusalka was believed to emerge more often, her voice carried by the wind across riverbanks. Celebrations arose around this time. Wreaths of flowers were tossed onto streams, candles were lit along lakeshores, and young women braided ribbons into their hair before approaching the water's edge. These rites were not done in fear, but in recognition of water's power to cleanse, renew, and transform. The Rusalka was part of this transformation, an ancient symbol of the Earth's rebirth. There were stories of the Rusalka wandering far from her watery home on moonlit nights. Villagers claimed to see her gliding through fields, her hair trailing behind her like a dark river, her steps leaving dew in the grass long before dawn. She moved silently, as though walking in a dream. Some believed she carried messages from the water spirits to the land. Others said she wandered for companionship, gazing upon the sleeping world with longing. But by the first light of morning, she always returned to her river, slipping beneath the surface like a soft sigh. The people respected these journeys, knowing better than to approach a Rusalka wandering alone. Not because she meant harm, but because she carried the weight of the river with her, its calm depths, its hidden currents, its ancient memory. To cross her path without invitation was to disturb something delicate and sacred. Yet if someone greeted her with sincerity, with a bowed head or a whispered blessing, she sometimes responded with kindness. The river might remain calm during a storm. A missing object might wash ashore near their home. A lost pet might wander back safely. These were her quiet gestures of gratitude. Water spirits were not limited to Rusalki alone. Beneath rivers flowed entire communities of beings, each with its own role. Deep beneath the surface, spirits known as Vodianoi moved like shadows, shaping currents and stirring whirlpools. In marshlands, quieter spirits clung to reeds, humming soft melodies in the wind. Mountain streams held their own guardians, lively and quick, who darted between stones. But the Rusalka remained the most beloved and feared among them, a figure who bridged the worlds of human and water with grace and complexity. Children were taught from a young age how to move respectfully around rivers and lakes. They were told never to whistle near the water at night, for the sound might attract spirits curious or displeased. They were told not to run recklessly along riverbanks, for the Rusalka disliked chaos. They learned to dip their fingers into streams before drinking, whispering a small thanks into the ripples. And they knew that if they ever felt watched near the water, it was wise to speak gently and move slowly, acknowledging that the Rusalka might be nearby. One story, passed through generations, told of a young woman who came to the river each evening to wash her family's clothes. She always approached quietly, placing a few petals on the water as an offering. One night, she saw a pale figure sitting on a rock, combing her long, shimmering hair. The young woman did not flee. Instead, she lowered her eyes respectfully and continued her work. The Rusalka watched her silently for a long time, then slipped into the water, leaving a swirl of glowing ripples behind. From that day on, the young woman found her tasks easier. Water warmed quickly in her hands, laundry dried faster in the sun, and the river always seemed to flow gently when she approached. Such stories taught villagers that the Rusalka responded not to fear, but to recognition. In other tales, travelers spoke of hearing soft singing near ponds at dusk, voices so beautiful and aching that even the wind seemed to pause. These songs were not meant to lure or frighten. They were expressions of longing, echoes of a world older than memory. To hear the Rusalka sing was considered rare and sacred, a sign that the listener had been allowed to glimpse a sorrow or joy too deep for words. Those who heard her often felt changed afterward, more aware of the world's fragile beauty, more attentive to the quiet movements of water. Despite her association with sadness in some stories, the Rusalka was not a spirit of tragedy. She was a spirit of flow, transition, reflection, and renewal. Her presence reminded the people that water was ever-changing, carrying away what was old, returning what was needed, and shaping the land with patient persistence. She embodied the cycles of drought and abundance, stillness and movement, frost and thaw. She taught that nothing remained the same forever, and that balance required both giving and letting go. As villages grew and generations passed, belief in the Rusalka endured. Even as new religions took root, even as roads replaced forest paths and mills reshaped riverbanks, the people continued to feel her presence in ripples, in sudden chills, in the hush that settled over water at dusk. They knew that spirits such as the Rusalka did not vanish simply because humans changed their ways of living. She remained, woven into the river's memories, moving through reeds and moonlight as she always had, patient, watchful, deeply connected to the water that shaped her world. For the Rusalka was not merely a spirit to be feared or revered. She was the quiet voice of water itself, its calm surface, its hidden depths, its eternal flow. A reminder that beneath every ripple lies a story. Beneath every reflection lies a presence. Beneath every drop lies a world that listens, remembers, and breathes. As the seasons turned and the rivers rose and fell with their rhythms, the people learned to sense not only the Rusalka herself, but the shifting moods of the waters she governed. For water, in the Slavic imagination, was never still inside its spirit. Even in quiet pools where minnows drifted lazily, there existed a faint pulse, an ancient awareness that stirred beneath the mirrored surface. The Rusalka was this awareness given form, moving in harmony with the deep breath of streams and lakes. And those who lived close to water grew attuned to her presence as naturally as they recognized the scent of rain or the sound of wind through reeds. Spring marked the beginning of her brightest season. The thaw loosened winter's grip, freeing rivers trapped under sheets of ice. As the currents awakened and roared with fresh energy, people believed the Rusalka stirred in joy. She drifted near the surface more often, her hair floating like soft kelp around her shoulders, her laughter echoing faintly through the bubbling shallows. Fishermen preparing their nets for the year's first catch often paused at the river's edge, sensing a watchful presence. If the water shimmered slightly when the sky was still, they took it as a sign that the Rusalka approved, blessing the season ahead. During this time, villagers performed gentle rituals at the water's edge. They braided wreaths of early flowers, primrose, buttercup, and pale violets, and set them afloat on the river. The wreaths spun slowly, drifting like tiny suns upon the surface, If a wreath floated smoothly downstream, the family believed the Rusalka carried goodwill toward them. If it twirled in place or sank quickly, caution guided the days to come. These rites did not seek control over the spirit, they sought understanding, a way of reading the quiet language she used to speak through water. Children, bold and filled with wonder, approached the riverbanks during spring with wide eyes. Their parents warned them to tread carefully, to show respect, to keep their voices soft. But children had their own relationship with the Rusalka, one woven with innocence rather than fear. They tossed pebbles gently into the water, whispering small wishes. Some claimed that when they dipped their toes into the cold water, they felt a cool hand brush past, not frightening, but curious. A few said they heard humming beneath the ripples. Adults rarely heard such things, for the Rusalka revealed herself most easily to hearts unburdened by doubt. With summer came her wildest moods. Rivers warmed, reeds grew tall, and dragonflies skimmed like sparks along the banks. In these months, the Rusalka moved with restless purpose. She darted beneath lily pads, circled through deep pools where the sun could not reach, and stirred the currents with her shifting emotions. Summer storms often reflected her turmoil. The people believed that when rain came suddenly or thunder cracked across the sky without warning, the Rusalka was expressing joy or sorrow too vast for silence. During warm nights, she wandered farther from the water. Villagers returning late from the fields sometimes glimpsed her drifting across meadows lit by moonlight. She moved with strange grace, leaving behind trails of dew that glimmered like silver threads. Farmers taught their children to bow their heads when crossing paths where the grass was bent in perfect arcs. For such shapes were signs the Rusalka had passed only moments before. To walk across such tracks without acknowledgement was to disregard the spirit's passage, something no respectful villager dared to do. At midsummer, when the sun lingered long and the land glowed in its fullest vitality, the early Slavs held celebrations woven with water magic. Fires were lit along lake shores, casting flickering reflections that danced across the surface. Young women gathered in groups, singing old songs about love, fate, and the spirits who listened beneath the waves. They released wreaths onto the rivers, watching the flowers drift and swirl. A wreath that floated straight and true was said to carry the Rusalka's blessing. One that circled or darted unexpectedly meant the spirit was offering a lesson or warning. Even in the midst of celebration, there remained a reverent distance. No one mocked the water or shouted across it. No one tossed objects carelessly into its depths. The boundary between human and spirit remained clear, a line of respect drawn in ripples and moonlight. For the Rusalka's moods were deep and unpredictable, shaped by currents unseen and memories older than mortal life. Autumn, however, softened her presence. As leaves turned gold and crimson and drifted onto the surface of lakes, the Rusalka's movements slowed. She appeared less often near the banks, retreating to deeper waters where the world grew quiet. Villagers walking along the shore sometimes felt a deep calm settle over them, as though the Rusalka's energy had shifted into restful contemplation. Fishermen who cast lines into the autumn rivers noticed the water seemed gentler, its currents slow and deliberate. It was said the Rusalka entered a time of reflection, following the rhythm of nature's decline into winter. Yet even in her quietness, she remained attentive. When someone approached the water in sorrow, as people often did during this season of endings, the Rusalka listened with unusual tenderness. Perhaps she recognized loss in the fading of leaves, or heard her own ancient echoes in human lament. Some who wept at the water's edge claimed the surface rippled lightly, as though touched by an unseen hand. Others found that the wind shifted gently, turning toward them with a warmth not felt elsewhere. These were her silent comforts, small, ephemeral gestures that acknowledged the depth of human emotion. Winter was her season of deepest mystery. Rivers froze at the surface, but beneath the ice, she moved in slow, dreamlike currents. Lakes turned to mirrors, reflecting pale skies and bare branches. Marshlands stiffened into stillness. In this cold, suspended world, the Rusalka's presence felt distant but profound. Children pressed their faces to the ice, imagining her drifting below like a pale figure in a darkened hall. Elders said she slept lightly, her awareness woven into the frozen silence, listening for the first crack of spring thaw. The Rusalka's relationship with humans grew strongest in these silent months. Travelers crossing frozen rivers whispered greetings into the wind, hoping she would guide them safely across the treacherous surface. Families mourning loved ones approached the water with candles, their flames trembling gently beneath winter skies. They believed the Rusalka carried these small lights into the depths, offering them to the unseen realm where spirits drifted like currents beyond human reach. Stories told of those rare individuals the Rusalka favored deeply, not through dramatic encounters, but through subtle, lifelong signs. A fisherwoman whose nets were always full. A child who never fell into deep water, though often playing near the river. A young man whose illness eased whenever he sat beside the lake, breathing in its cool air. These people did not boast of these blessings. They held them quietly, knowing that the Rusalka's gifts were personal threads woven into the fabric of their lives. There were tales, too, of those who angered her. The Rusalka did not harm without reason, but she did not tolerate disrespect. A careless logger who dumped wood scraps into the river found the current turning against him, dragging his raft in circles. A group of youths who boasted loudly near the lake felt an uncanny chill settle upon them, causing them to flee. Yet these warnings were gentle compared to the stories of old, stories told in hushed tones, in which the Rusalka withdrew her protection entirely from those who disregarded the water's sacredness. These tales served as lessons, reminding each generation that harmony with nature required constant attention. Through all these seasons and stories, one truth remained constant. The Rusalka was a being of balance. She brought abundance when honored, withheld her favor when disrespected, and offered comfort when needed most. She embodied the gift and peril of water, the life it sustained, the danger it carried, the memories it stored. And because water touched every part of existence, fields, homes, bodies, breath, the Rusalka's presence flowed through every corner of Slavic life. Even as centuries passed and Christianity reshaped the spiritual landscape, the Rusalka remained. She shifted into new stories, adapted to new beliefs, but never vanished. Children still felt watched near rivers. Elders still poured a few drops of drink into the water before sipping themselves. Fishermen still whispered prayers in the early morning light, their words drifting across misty currents. The Rusalka lived on in ripples, in songs, in dreams, woven into the quiet pulse of water itself. But she was never merely a figure of folklore, never merely a spirit or a warning. She was the living memory of rivers, the soft breath of lakes, the dream of the world beneath the surface. A reminder that water listens, that it holds its own wisdom, and that sometimes, in its deepest stillness, it speaks. Long before written calendars marked the turning of the year, the Slavic people knew the passing of seasons through the forest itself. They read time in the scent of thawing soil, in the hum of bees waking from winter, in the deepening hush that fell across the land before snow. The forest whispered to them through shifting light, through rustling leaves, through the sudden silence of animals or the bright return of birds. And because every season carried its own spirit, its own breath, its own voice, the people shaped their lives around rituals meant to honor the unseen guardians who walked the land beside them. These rituals were not born from fear, but from relationship. They were threads binding humans to the forest, to the beings who dwelled within its shadows, and to the rhythms that governed existence itself. Each offering, each chant, each movement around a fire or tree or stone was a gesture of gratitude for the world that sustained them. And among all the spirits who watched from behind bark and branch, it was the Leshy, the ancient guardian of the deep woods, who received these gestures most often, for he was the keeper of balance, the protector of creatures, and the silent teacher of those who wandered his domain. Spring marked the return of the forest's bright pulse, and with it came the first rituals of renewal. As the snow melted and the last breaths of winter faded, villagers gathered at the forest's edge with baskets of simple offerings. Bread baked with herbs, small jars of milk, handfuls of crushed grain. These were placed on stones warmed by the first sunlight, accompanied by whispered thanks for the safe passing of winter. Children ran among the trees, tying bright ribbons onto birch branches, the tree associated with purification and new beginnings. The forest swayed with color, as though dressed in celebration of the season's first green. Sometimes, before dawn, a small group ventured deeper into the woods to perform a more solemn part of the spring ritual. Carrying torches that flickered like newborn stars, they sought a clearing where the earth felt warm beneath their feet. There, they sang low, rhythmic songs, soft chants that rose and fell with the breath of the forest. These songs were invitations, calling the spirits of the wood to awaken fully from winter's slumber. The early Slavs believed that sound, like wind, could stir the unseen, and so their voices wove through branches and moss, encouraging life to rise from quiet places. In return, the forest offered subtle blessings. Sap flowed more freely from birch trees. Wild garlic and early greens sprouted in abundance. Birds returned sooner to their nests. Sometimes, a sudden warm breeze passed through the clearing, though the surrounding land remained cold. Elders said this breeze was the forest's answer, the Leshy moving unseen among the trees, accepting the offerings with a quiet nod. As spring deepened into summer, the rituals grew livelier, more vibrant, echoing the forest's own abundance. Summer was the season of growth, of long days and warm nights, of animals roaming freely through lush underbrush. It was also the season when the boundary between human and spirit felt thinnest. Villagers moved with gentle caution during these months, knowing the Leshy walked more openly. His footsteps could be sensed in the sudden hush of birds or the strange bending of branches, and so offerings became more frequent, marking the forest paths with small expressions of gratitude. One of the most beloved summer rituals was the green bundle offering. Families gathered leaves, flowers, and slender branches, tying them with natural fibers into small bundles. These were hung from trees near the forest's edge or placed near streams and springs. Each bundle carried a silent wish: health, protection, good harvest, safety for travelers. Children often placed their bundles beside small animal burrows or low-hanging branches, believing the forest animals would carry their wishes to the Leshy. And in the gentle rustling of leaves, they sometimes thought they heard a response. Midsummer brought the most important ritual of all, the night of the fern flower. This night was steeped in ancient magic, believed to be the moment when the forest stood closest to the realm of the divine. People gathered herbs believed to carry protective power, weaving them into wreaths to wear around their necks. Fires were lit in meadows and along riverbanks, their glow reflecting off leaves like scattered embers. At the forest's edge, young men and women entered the woods in pairs, searching for the mythical fern flower said to bloom only on this one night, glowing like a tiny star hidden beneath fronds. Few claimed to find it, but the search itself was sacred. The forest on this night felt alive in a luminous, mysterious way. Fireflies drifted like wandering spirits. The breeze stirred with voices softer than whispers. Branches swayed as though guided by unseen hands. People believed the Leshy watched closely, allowing humans into parts of the forest normally hidden. Finding the fern flower was said to bring protection, wisdom, or great fortune. But even those who returned empty-handed carried a sense of wonder, having walked in harmony with the spirits under the midsummer sky. After midsummer, as the year slowly curved toward autumn, the forest rituals shifted toward gratitude rather than seeking. The first fruit offering marked the beginning of the harvest season. The earliest berries, mushrooms, and nuts were taken not to the kitchen, but to a sacred tree, often an ancient oak or ash. These first fruits were laid carefully at its roots, sometimes accompanied by a pinch of salt or a splash of mead. The offering acknowledged the forest's generosity and asked for continued abundance. The tree's branches rustling overhead were taken as a sign of acceptance, as though the spirit of the forest bowed in return. Hunters also participated in rituals during this season, leaving tokens before entering the deeper woods. A small piece of bread, a carved wooden figure, or a tuft of wool was placed near the roots of a sturdy tree. These offerings were not to ensure success, but to express humility. Hunters asked for permission rather than dominance. They knew the forest's creatures lived under the Leshy's protection, and taking from the forest without gratitude risked upsetting the delicate balance of the wild. As autumn deepened and leaves fell in cascades of gold, copper, and red, the forest acquired an air of solemnity. This was the season of stillness rites, ceremonies dedicated to honoring the spirits preparing for winter. Families walked quietly through the trees, gathering fallen leaves into small mounds. These mounds were sprinkled with grain and herbs as offerings for creatures seeking rest. Children placed tiny wreaths made from twigs and moss onto stones, whispering wishes for a gentle winter. The forest seemed to listen closely, its breath slowing, its shadows lengthening. The final ritual of the year came with the first snowfall. This was the winter greeting, a simple but deeply meaningful ceremony. Families stepped outside at dawn, carrying small bowls of warm milk or bits of bread. They placed these offerings at the forest's edge, acknowledging the spirits who watched through the silent months. This gesture was believed to maintain peace between the home and the wild, reminding the Leshy that the household still honored him despite the cold. And if the snowfall softened enough to reveal delicate tracks near the offerings, tracks of deer, fox, or even patterns that seemed too strange to be made by any known creature, the family considered it a blessing. Through all these rituals, one truth remained constant. The forest was not merely a place of trees and shadows. It was a living partner, a teacher, a sanctuary, and sometimes a mirror. The beings within it, seen and unseen, responded to the gestures of humans just as humans responded to the moods of the land. This reciprocal relationship shaped the heart of Slavic spirituality, reminding each generation that life flourished most fully when maintained through respect, humility, and quiet devotion. For in the early Slavic world, every season carried a lesson, every offering carried meaning. Every rustle, every shadow, every change in the wind reminded the people that they lived within a world of ancient presence, a world that listened. As autumn faded and the last crimson leaves drifted toward the quiet earth, the people felt the forest entering its long inward breath. The rituals that had once filled the air with songs and swirling ribbons softened into gestures of gentleness, smaller offerings, slower movements, quieter prayers. For winter approached, and winter was the time when the forest spirits retreated deeper into their ancient realms. The villagers knew that the Leshy, the hidden creatures, and all the swift shadows between roots moved differently in these months, conserving their power beneath frost and silence. And so the people adjusted their rituals to match the forest's slower pulse. Winter brought with it a stillness that seemed almost sacred. The breath of the land became shallow and steady, like a sleeper resting after long labor. Snow muffled the sound of axes and footsteps, turning even the busiest days into something dreamlike. The people believed that this season demanded great care, for the spirits preferred quiet and respect while the forest slept. Before entering the woods, villagers often knelt to brush snow aside and place tiny offerings beneath evergreen boughs. Crumbs of bread, small carved figures, or sprigs of herbs saved from summer. These offerings were not meant to awaken the spirits, but to reassure them that humans had not forgotten the ancient pact of gratitude. There were families who, during the coldest nights, hung small wreaths of dried flowers and pine needles beside their doors. These wreaths served as symbols of peace, signaling to the wandering spirits that the household welcomed harmony. Sometimes, villagers woke at dawn to find the wreaths dusted with patterns in the snow, delicate spirals or tracks that seemed too neat, too purposeful to be made by any known creature. These were seen as blessings, small acknowledgements from the forest guardians who moved unseen across the moonlit ground. Inside the cabins, rituals continued with a softer, more intimate rhythm. The hearth became the center of everything: warmth, light, memory, and protection. Winter was the season when the boundary between home spirits and forest spirits blurred most gently. Families believed that the Leshy and his kin sometimes wandered close, drawn by the glow of firelight. To welcome them, people set aside a small portion of their meal, usually a piece of bread or a spoonful of porridge, and left it near the hearth for any passing spirit who might seek comfort. Though the offering rarely vanished entirely, it often shifted slightly in the night, as though nudged by a curious hand. This subtle movement was all the confirmation the families needed that their gift had been noticed. As the winter deepened, the forest rituals turned toward endurance. Villagers carved small wooden charms shaped like leaves or acorns and hung them in windows to protect against harsh winds. They carried handfuls of dried herbs into the woods, leaving them near animal tracks or at hollowed tree trunks for the spirits who might shelter there. Even the act of lighting a lantern before stepping outside was considered a gesture of respect, its glow a soft promise that the person would tread gently across the sleeping land. When the first subtle hints of spring approached, long before the snow melted, the people felt the forest begin to stir again. The air tensioned with anticipation. Birds chirped cautiously from snow-laden branches. Water dripped from icicles in slow, rhythmic patterns. In these small shifts, villagers sensed the earliest wakefulness of the spirits, and so they prepared offerings meant to encourage this awakening. One of the most cherished of these early spring rituals was the awakening walk. Families gathered before sunrise and ventured to the forest's edge, carrying baskets filled with grains, dried apples, and the last remnants of autumn honey. Moving quietly, so quietly that the sound of breath was louder than footsteps, they scattered these foods across the snow, creating small trails leading toward the deeper woods. Children often helped, pressing soft little fingerprints into the snow beside the offerings. These trails were invitations, gentle reminders to the spirits that the world was ready to welcome them back from winter's stillness. In return, the forest answered in ways only the attentive could see. A faint green bud peeking through thawing soil earlier than expected. A deer stepping boldly into a clearing where it had not ventured all winter. A shift in the winds that carried the scent of wet earth rather than frost. These signs, though small, reassured the villagers that their offerings had been accepted and that the forest's guardians moved once more through the awakening land. As spring unfurled, rituals grew more vibrant again. When the first shoots of grass appeared, children wove small crowns from them and placed these delicate circles at the bases of trees, especially birches, the tree most strongly associated with purity and renewal. Birch sap, collected carefully from tapped trunks, was shared among families and offered back to the forest in small splashes poured onto the earth. This was a symbol of reciprocity, acknowledging that what was taken from the land must also be returned. Another beloved spring ritual was the song of the returning spirits. Groups of villagers, mostly women and girls, gathered near streams or rivers at dusk and sang soft, lilting melodies. These songs were old, passed down through countless generations. They carried no words of command or pleading. Instead, they were gentle greetings, inviting the spirits of water and forest to step forward into the warmer seasons. The water often responded by shimmering slightly or catching light more brightly than the surrounding air, as though acknowledging the singer's presence. Summer brought its own rituals, echoing those of part one, but infused with deeper intention now that the forest was fully awake. People returned to the woods with baskets of herbs, weaving them into garlands for trees. Fires were lit not to summon spirits, but to honor them. Careful, respectful blazes whose smoke curled gently upward like offerings of breath to the sky. In the heart of the forest, small circles of stones marked places where people believed the Leshy paused in the heat of the day. Villagers left cool water in clay cups at these spots, knowing that spirits, too, felt the weight of summer throughout summer, rituals intertwined with daily life. A woman gathering berries might whisper thanks with each handful. A shepherd guiding sheep through a shaded glade might touch the nearest tree and murmur a greeting to the guardian who watched from hidden places. Hunters, as always, walked with humility, sometimes pausing to tie ribbons around branches to signal their gratitude for the forest's generosity. These were not formal ceremonies. They were lived rituals, woven seamlessly into ordinary actions. Autumn carried a more solemn but beautiful tone. As leaves fell in spirals of gold and rust, villagers performed the farewell to the green spirits, scattering petals and dried herbs along forest paths. They acknowledged that the spirits of growth and abundance were retreating, making room for those of rest and silence. Food offerings were more substantial: apples, grains, smoked fish, symbolizing gratitude for the harvest. Fires were smaller, gentler, meant to warm rather than blaze. Children learned that autumn was the season of listening, not requesting. The forest's voice grew deeper, quieter, older. And as autumn bowed into early winter once again, the cycle began anew. The seasonal rituals that shaped the Slavic world were never rigid or forced. They flowed naturally, like water finding its course or leaves drifting to the ground. Each offering, each song, each small gesture toward the unseen was a reminder that humans did not walk alone. They walked in harmony with a world alive in every root, every ripple, every breath of wind. These rituals were not transactions, but relationships, not demands, but conversations. Not superstition, but gratitude woven into the fabric of living. For the forest spirits, the Leshy, the unseen guardians, the small watchers in bark and root, responded not to fear, but to respect. And so year after year, generation after generation, the people honored the forest, and the forest, in its quiet, ancient way, honored them in return. Long after the old rituals dimmed, and the ancient groves grew quieter beneath the changing world, the memory of the forest spirits did not vanish. They simply shifted, settling into stories carried from voice to voice, hearth to hearth, generation to generation. The people no longer left offerings beneath every birch or whispered greetings at every river crossing. Yet the presence of the spirits remained woven into the very fabric of Slavic life. The Leshy still stirred in the imagination of shepherds, the Domovoi still warmed the corners of humble homes, and the Ruzalka still shimmered through the reflections of rivers touched by moonlight. These spirits became more than beings of the wild. They became memories that lived in the hearts of the people, enduring through centuries of change. In villages where stone houses replaced wooden huts, the stories continued. Elders gathered children around hearths and spoke in low, rhythmic voices about the guardians who once walked beside humanity. They told of the Leshy who rearranged paths to teach humility, of the Domovoi who ensured a household stayed warm and safe, of the Ruzalka who listened from the depths of quiet lakes. These stories were not told as distant myth, but as gentle reminders of how intimately connected the people once were with the living world around them. Children listened wide-eyed, sensing that the boundary between the old world and the new was thinner than adults sometimes admitted. Even as Christianity spread across the Slavic lands, reshaping spiritual practices and introducing new rituals, the old spirits endured. They did not disappear, they adapted. Families placed icons above their hearths, yet still left crumbs of bread at night for the Domovoi. They attended church festivals, yet continued to read the signs of the forest on their way home. In many places, the Leshy was quietly reimagined as an angelic guardian of the woods, while house spirits were seen not as pagan remnants, but as benevolent protectors created by God to watch over the faithful. The blending of beliefs created a unique spiritual landscape where old and new walked side by side, neither overpowering the other. Folk tales became the bridge between the fading rituals and the living memory of the spirits. Travelers carried these tales from village to village, weaving new versions with each retelling. In one region, the Leshy became a giant wrapped in moss and bark. In another, he appeared as a small, green-haired trickster. The essential spirit remained the same, but the details shifted like leaves in the wind. Some stories painted him as stern and watchful, others portrayed him as playful and curious. No matter how the tale changed, the Leshy continued to embody the forest's ancient voice, a voice the people could not forget. The Domovoi, too, lived on in stories shared behind closed doors during long winter nights. Mothers told tales of the small, bearded spirit who tidied the home at night, who protected children from nightmares, who warned families when danger approached. Children grew up believing that every creak in the floorboard was his gentle step, every flickering ember his watchful eye. These stories anchored the household in a sense of continuity, reminding families that even as the world changed outside their doors, something ancient and familiar remained within the home's walls. The Rusalka's legacy took on a different shape, haunting, beautiful, sorrowful, and mesmerizing all at once. Poets of later centuries invoked her as a symbol of longing, a figure who embodied nature's delicate balance between beauty and danger. Artists painted her drifting beneath willow branches, her hair blending with the currents, her eyes holding the stillness of deep water. Musicians composed songs about her, weaving melodies that sounded like ripples stirred by soft wind. Through these art forms, the Rusalka became not only a folklore figure, but a muse, an echo of the land's voice carried into the realm of culture and imagination. As generations passed, these spirits became woven into proverbs and sayings that shaped daily life. Farmers spoke of the Leshy when the woods grew unusually silent. Grandmothers invoked the Domovoi when household chores went smoothly or strangely awry. Fishermen, gazing into still water at dawn, murmured quiet blessings to the Rusalka before casting their nets. Even those who did not believe in spirits entirely could not help but use their names in conversation, for they were too deeply rooted in the language, too familiar to be forgotten. In rural regions where modernity came slowly, the spirits remained more present, almost tangible. Old women sweeping their doorways at dusk sometimes paused to whisper a greeting to the unseen. Men entering barns early in the morning touched the doorframe lightly, acknowledging the household guardian. Children played games inspired by stories of shape-shifting forest beings. For them, the spirits were not relics of the past but quiet companions hidden behind daily life. These areas preserved the old world's breath long after cities replaced villages and new customs overshadowed ancient rites. And even in the cities, places of towering stone walls, bustling markets, and lantern-lit streets, the spirits left their subtle traces. A sudden gust of wind rustling through a park might remind a passerby of the Leshy's restless footsteps. A cat staring into an empty corner inside an apartment might stir a childhood memory of the Domovoi. The reflection of streetlights rippling across a river might evoke the presence of a Rusalka drifting beneath the surface. The spirits lived on not only in stories, but in the quiet moments when the modern world brushed against the old. Folklorists of later centuries collected these tales with great care, traveling from village to village to record the memories of elders before they faded. They listened to weathered voices recount encounters with forest guardians household spirits, and water beings. Some stories were light-hearted and playful. Others carried warnings about the dangers of disrespecting nature. Many were fragmented, half-remembered, or stitched together from generations of retellings. But each one held a thread of ancient truth, a glimpse into a worldview in which every part of the natural world was alive and aware. These collections of folklore became the seeds for modern studies of Slavic mythology. Scholars approached the stories with curiosity and reverence, seeking to understand not just the spirits themselves, but the values they represented. They saw the Leshy as a symbol of humanity's complex relationship with the wild, the Domovoi as a manifestation of the home's soul, and the Rusalka as a reminder of water's unpredictable nature. Through their work, the spirits found new life, not as forgotten remnants, but as important figures in the cultural heritage of a vast and varied land. As time passed into the modern era, the old spirits found refuge in literature, theatre, and film. Writers reimagined them, giving them new voices and new realms to inhabit. Some portrayed the Leshy as a melancholic guardian grieving the loss of ancient forests. Others cast the Rusalka as a tragic figure seeking harmony in a world that no longer listens to the whispers of water. The Domovoi appeared in stories as a stubborn but endearing creature who continues to tidy homes long after humans have forgotten his name. In each retelling, these beings found new admirers, new listeners, new believers of a softer kind. Yet their truest legacy lived not in books, nor in museums, nor even in academic study. It lived in the quiet places where the natural world still breathed with old rhythms. In forests where sunlight shimmered beneath towering pines, some people still felt watched by unseen eyes. In lakes where the water lay still beneath the moon, there were those who sensed the gentle presence of something listening. In homes warmed by small fires, families sometimes paused to acknowledge a shadow moving just beyond sight. These moments were subtle, fleeting, easily dismissed. But for those who felt them, they carried a warmth older than memory. For the spirits of the Slavic world endured not through fear, nor ritual, nor the demands of worship. They endured through story, through remembering, through the gentle way the land itself holds onto things that once mattered deeply. They lived on in the hush of forests, in the glow of hearth fires, in the ripples of moonlit lakes, and in the hearts of those who still listen to the quiet, ancient breath of the world. As centuries continued their quiet turning, the spirits of the Slavic world, once called upon in rituals, once honored with offerings of grain, milk, and whispered prayers, became woven into the deeper fabric of identity itself. They were no longer only guardians of forests or rivers or hearths. They became symbols of how a people remembered their past, how they understood their place within the natural world, and how they held on to the gentle wisdom of those who came before. The forest might have changed, the villages might have grown, but the stories endured, carried in subtle ways by hearts that still felt something stir in the quiet of twilight. These stories continue to live most vividly in rural regions, where ancient forests still cast long shadows over winding paths. In such places, children grew up hearing tales not as distant folklore, but as familiar truths whispered during evening chores. Grandfathers spoke of the Leshy with solemn respect, describing how the spirit once led hunters astray to teach them humility. Grandmothers told of the Domovoi who tidied rooms at night or warned families of approaching misfortune. Teenagers walking home after sunset sometimes quickened their steps, not out of fear, but from the strange awareness that they were not entirely alone. The unseen presence of the old spirits lingered like a second breath moving through the air. Even in households where belief waned, storytelling acted as a bridge between skepticism and reverence. Families who no longer left offerings still told their children to greet the forest before entering it, to tread lightly near rivers, to keep their homes tidy and warm. These habits were not explained as obligations toward spirits, but as proper ways of living, practices rooted in respect and attentiveness. Yet beneath these simple gestures lived the old understanding that the world responded to how one moved through it, and that kindness toward the land brought its own quiet blessings. As literacy spread and printing presses began to shape culture, the spirits found new life in written tales. Folklorists, poets, and collectors traveled through remote villages gathering fragments of ancient memory. Half-remembered encounters, songs sung to soothe storms, stories whispered by crumbling hearths. They recorded the many faces of the Leshy, noting how he changed shape from region to region. They documented the countless variations of the Domovoi, sometimes gentle, sometimes stern, but always deeply tied to the home. They compiled the haunting songs of the Rusalka, preserving melodies that held the echo of rippling water. Through these efforts, the spirits were given a kind of permanence, their presence carried into pages that could not forget. The literary world embraced these beings with fascination. Writers in the 19th and early 20th centuries shaped them into characters that embodied the tension between old and new worlds. In poems, the Rusalka became a symbol of longing and beauty that eluded understanding. In novels, the Leshy appeared as a living memory of the wild, resisting the advance of human ambition. In children's stories, the Domovoi became a small, stubborn figure who insisted on teaching families the value of kindness, humility, and care. These reinterpretations kept the myths alive, giving them new forms for new generations while preserving the spirit of the old tales. Artists further wove the spirits into cultural memory. Painters captured the Rusalka in soft strokes of green and blue, her hair entwined with reeds and moonlight. Sculptors crafted small figures of the Domovoi with mischievous smiles and tangled beards, placing them on shelves as reminders of home's quiet guardian. Musicians composed pieces inspired by forest winds and river currents, their compositions echoing the movements of unseen spirits. Each medium became a new pathway through which the ancient beings moved, shaping imagination long after their rituals had faded. But perhaps the most profound legacy lived in the landscapes themselves. Certain forests became known as places touched by the Leshy, woods where even the birds moved with unusual caution, or where mist drifted in swirling patterns no breeze could explain. Lakes carried reputations of being watched by water spirits, especially those that shimmered strangely under moonlight. Even the smallest home, warmed by a modest hearth, felt somehow deeper and more alive for those who carried the memory of the Domovoi. These places were not merely physical locations, they were spaces where people felt the presence of history pressing gently against the present. In the growing cities, where cobblestone streets replaced winding dirt paths and lanterns replaced firelight, the memory lived in subtler, softer forms. Market stalls sold small charms carved from wood, miniature leshies that promised protection for travels, tiny domovoi meant to bring harmony to new homes. Booksellers displayed collections of old folklore, their pages carrying the echoes of ancient beliefs. Street performers recited tales of forest spirits, drawing crowds of children who listened with wide eyes, just as their ancestors had listened by firelight centuries before. The spirits moved through these modern spaces quietly but persistently, woven into the rhythm of everyday life. As political borders shifted and communities were scattered across new lands, the spirits traveled with them. Immigrants carried stories of the Domovoi into new homes built oceans away from the lands where he first watched over hearths. The Rusalka appeared in myths retold by families longing for familiar rivers and lakes. The Leshy became a symbol of the forests left behind, forests that continue to live in memory even when far away. Across continents, these stories preserved a sense of identity, connecting people to the land of their ancestors through the gentle breath of folklore. In modern times, as environmental awareness grew and the natural world faced new threats, the spirits found renewed relevance. The Leshy, once seen as a mischievous guardian, became a symbol of environmental protection, an ancient reminder that the forest was not a resource to be conquered, but a living presence to be respected. The Rusalka, once feared for her unpredictable beauty, became a symbol of the delicate balance of water ecosystems. The Domovoi, once believed to guard the hearth, became a symbol of the intimacy and sanctity of the home. These reinterpretations reflected a world remembering what it had forgotten, that the earth is alive, and our relationship with it shapes our collective future. Even those who did not know the old tales felt their influence in unexpected ways. People walking through dense woods often felt the uncanny sensation of being watched, not fear, but awareness, as though the trees held someone's memory. Homeowners who heard a sudden creak in a quiet room sometimes smiled without knowing why, feeling oddly comforted. Children playing by rivers instinctively lowered their voices, sensing the stillness of water. These subtle instincts were cultural memory made physical, echoes of spirits carried in the bones and blood of a people shaped by centuries of living close to the land. Festivals revived in modern villages also carried the spirit's legacy forward. Spring celebrations included dances inspired by the awakening of the forest, while autumn festivals honored the harvest with songs reminiscent of ancient rituals. In some places, people once again floated wreaths down rivers, not as true offerings, but as ceremonial gestures connecting them to ancestors. Schools taught children the old tales not as superstition, but as cultural heritage, as a way of understanding how their ancestors made sense of the world. In all these ways, stories, art, intuition, ritual, landscape, and memory, the spirits of the Slavic world continue to live, not in the literal sense of wandering through forests or whispering through river fountains, but in the deeper sense of shaping how people saw the world. They taught lessons about humility, gratitude, balance, and belonging. They reminded people that even in the modern world, the unseen matters, the subtle matters, the quiet matters, for the spirit's legacy was not defined by ritual alone. It lived in the values passed down from parents to children, in the gentle respect for nature that lingered across generations, in the stories that allowed the past to breathe through the present. The world no longer moved at the slow, ancient pace of the forest, yet the memory of those rhythms endured, alive in the whisper of wind through birch trees, alive in the reflection of moonlight on still water, alive in the warmth of a quiet home at night, alive wherever hearts still listened for the soft, patient echoes of the beings who once walked beside humanity in the deep, dreaming woods. And so, as our long journey through the forests, rivers, hearths, and memories of the Slavic world draws to its final quiet breath, the spirits we have walked beside begin to retreat into the deeper folds of the night. Not vanishing, not fading entirely, but withdrawing with the same gentle patience that guided them through centuries of watching over humankind. Their stories soften like footprints pressed into snow just before dawn, with edges blurring, outlines loosening, but the path still clearly leading somewhere beyond the reach of waking sight. The forest settles first. Tall pines sway in slow arcs, as though nodding to an unseen presence moving among them. The memory of the Leshy lingers here, woven into the hush between branches, into the soft rhythm of leaves brushing against one another. He does not step forward now, does not shift paths or whisper warnings. Instead, he retreats into the essence of the woods, into the cool scent of moss, into the faint stir of roots deep within the earth, into the rustling breath of creatures settling in for sleep. His world grows dimmer, more dreamlike, blending into the quiet pulse of the land itself. Yet even in rest, he remains. As long as forests breathe, the Leshy is never truly gone. Beyond the trees, the rivers continue their endless sighing, weaving silver paths beneath the moon. Somewhere within those depths, the Rusalka drifts in slow, wandering arcs. Her presence is softer now, seen only in the ripple that breaks an otherwise perfect reflection, or the shimmer that flashes beneath the surface and disappears before it can be understood. She retreats not in sorrow, but in the way water naturally returns to stillness after a moment of motion. The river remains her sanctuary, her memory, her cradle. And though her voice grows faint as night deepens, the echo of her ancient songs lingers in the spaces where water and moonlight touch. Closer to home, where firelight dims and shadows lengthen against wooden beams, the Domovoi curls into his familiar corner. His small shape, unseen yet felt, withdraws into the gentle flicker of the hearth's final embers. He has watched over the household as he always has, quietly, devotedly, with a warmth that does not ask for praise. And now, as the night stretches long, he settles deeper into the walls, becoming once more the heartbeat of the home rather than a presence moving through it. His guardianship does not end with sleep. It simply shifts into a quieter form, woven into the very breath of the room. These spirits, forest, water, hearth, have guided us through the oldest memories of a land shaped by reverence and wonder. Their stories were once carried like lanterns through dark paths, teaching each generation how to walk gently, how to listen deeply, how to recognize the living presence in the natural world. And though the rituals that once honored them have softened with time, their imprint has never vanished. It remains in the instinctive hush that falls when someone steps beneath ancient trees. It lingers in the tremor of awe that passes over someone standing at the edge of still water at dusk. It flickers in the warmth one feels when a quiet room seems to breathe with more life than its walls should hold. For the truest legacy of the spirits is not found in grand tales, but in the small, almost imperceptible ways the world still speaks. A breeze that touches the cheek with the gentleness of a hand once offered in blessing. A moment of strange calm that falls in the middle of an anxious day. A faint whisper of intuition urging caution or offering comfort. These are the echoes of beings who once lived in close harmony with humanity. Echoes that remain because the bond was never fully broken. And perhaps that is why these stories endure. Not because they promise impossible wonders, but because they remind us of something we already know deep within. That the world is alive, and always has been. That every forest holds a presence older than its tallest tree. That every river listens. That every home gathers its own spirit with time. These truths do not fade simply because centuries pass. They settle into memory, shaping how people move, how they see, how they dream, in the quiet hours of night, when lanterns dim, when footsteps cease, when the world folds into a softer shape. The old spirits draw closer. Not in form, not in the ways they once revealed themselves through shadows and ripples, but in the whisper of feelings that rise when the heart grows still. A sense of being watched over, a sense of belonging to something larger, older, gentler than the life of any single person. These feelings are the inheritance the spirits left behind, a legacy not of fear but of comfort, not of power but of connection. The deeper the night becomes, the more the world softens into something that resembles what it once was. Before roads, before walls, before the noise of the age drowned out the quieter songs of earth and water. In this softened world, one can almost imagine the Leshy watching from behind a tree, a flicker of amusement in eyes that reflect starlight. One can imagine the Rusalka drifting beneath a thin sheet of moonlit glass, listening to the breath of the wind as though it were a long-lost companion. One can imagine the Domovoi settling into a home's warm spaces, smoothing the spirit of the household with invisible hands. And when dawn begins its slow ascent, pale at first, then gathering gold, the spirits do not vanish. They simply step deeper into the places where light and shadow meet, into the memories carried quietly in the hearts of those who remember. The forest will wake again with birdsong. The rivers will gleam beneath the sun. The homes will echo with footsteps and voices. And within all these places, the spirits will linger, not as figures to be feared or worshipped, but as soft presences reminding us of the world's ancient breath. So let this final moment settle gently upon you. Let the echoes of the old tales rest like warm embers in your mind. Let the silence of the forest, the sigh of the river, the glow of the hearth wrap around you like a familiar blanket. For stories such as these do not end, they drift, they transform, they settle into the quiet places of the soul. And tonight, as sleep moves closer, know that the spirits walk with you one last time, not as shadows in the dark, but as soft companions guiding you toward rest, toward peace, toward dreams where the old world still breathes, waiting gently for you to wander through it once more. Where sunlight breaks through trembling leaves, old spirits gather in drifting beams. They linger in the hush between heartbeats, waiting for those who walk slowly enough to notice.